I'm going to ask, we're really fortunate to have a terrific panel today, and so I'm going to ask everyone to sort of briefly introduce themselves. Maybe we can start down the end with Ryan.
Yeah, hi, Ryan Bowers with General Motors. I am Global Cybersecurity and Privacy Counsel. I handle privacy matters for connected and autonomous features vehicles, as well as supporting our global cybersecurity organization on a wide range of legal issues.
Hello everyone, my name is Tasha McCall. I'm the Director of Security and Fraud with First Data. My focus is on PII tokenization, that's personally identifiable information tokenization, and being able to secure consumers' data from end to end at the time that they provide the merchants with the data to the time that the data is used and stored. We're focused on making sure that experience is secure and everyone is protected within that life cycle.
Hi, I'm Kristie. I'm at Mitsubishi Electric. I am responsible for automotive cybersecurity, so specific to the actual product on vehicle cyber, which includes a lot of privacy data.
Hello, I'm McCallDirector. I am an in-house counsel at Harman International Industries, where I'm globally responsible for privacy and compliance, including products, including our internal systems and our HR data, all of the privacy-related data, information, legal advice comes from me. It's a great job.
And you heard about me. I work at a law firm in Chicago at Honigman, and I help companies stay compliant. I used to work for the government agency, sort of investigating and suing people that were not compliant. Now I'm helping companies stay compliant, among other things, in the world of privacy and data security. So let's set the table a little bit, and I'll ask Ryan to sort of start out and other people to pitch in. What kind of data are cars collecting, and then where is that data actually located or being stored?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So we're talking about what data is collected by vehicles. I think it's helpful to kind of talk more general about categories of data. There's potential to collect a wide range of data about the car itself, the performance of the car, diagnostic data, trouble code data, things of that nature. A lot of use cases for that data in terms of looking at problems with the vehicle, warranty, recall work. The second bucket of data that I usually talk about is driving behavior data. So this is data specific to what the driver is doing with the vehicle, how they're driving, where they're driving, etc. And then the third bucket of data I usually talk about is available data about what the consumer does in the vehicle. So there's things like, what radio they're listening to, whether they're using certain apps in the vehicle, things of that nature. And then there's an interesting category of data, think about drive data. And that's not necessarily any specific data element collected from a sensor or from an ECU, but what algorithms are run against that data and then what that produces. Think about a lot of those insurance dongles that plug in the car, collect data, and then are able to generate insights into how you are as a driver using algorithms they develop on top of that data.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Yes, yes to everything that Ryan has shared. In my role, I really focus on the PII, which would be the name, address, perhaps maybe even social security number. So how are all of these data points really collected when you think about the connected car? Well, think about when you get into a car that you've rented and you connect your Bluetooth with what's in the car. What happens? All of your information is just sent to the car's dashboard. So it's your name, it's all of your contacts, it's your address, etc. And why this is very important, the financial services industry has been protecting payments data for a long time using encryption and tokenization. We've learned that also PII data is critical to protect, so that there's this end-to-end protection that I was speaking about earlier. So when you enter all of your information into a car, your name, address, date of birth, etc., and it's not secured properly, it's easy for hackers to come about and access that information and create what is known as synthetic identities, individuals that do not exist, that takes bits and pieces of all of your personal data and then creates a new individual that ultimately takes out loans in your name or mortgages, etc. It really creates havoc for the consumers. And why it's important to you is when the customer gets into the car, they expect once they release all of that information within the connected car that is protected. If you're not able to protect that information, it's really a brand and reputation loss. So piggybacking off of what Ryan was saying, yes, all of that type of data needs to be protected, but with the personalization of the connected car, this PII data that I was referring to needs to be protected also.
And I think that the next generation of cars and apps and stuff that's being put on these vehicles is also adding a lot of that transactional data as well, and it's taking that next step of kind of what the data, what Ryan was talking about, and now it goes into that marketing algorithm and it turns out and it says, oh, well, you know, you listen to Maroon 5 music and Maroon 5 is a concert on Friday, do you want to buy a ticket? And you can do that all through your car, and then, you know, oh, I see you have tickets to Maroon 5. Would you also like to make a reservation for a restaurant across the street from the venue? And you can, you know, do that all from your car, and it's all at your fingertips. So there's a lot more additional data that's being added in as that, you know, enriched experience is continuing to evolve.
And increasingly, there are a few strategies that consumers, for example, a few tools that they can use in order to reduce the amount of data that's collected. So one of those tools involves consent. The other two tools that I'll talk about are consent and the exercise of data subject rights. It's more prevalent in the EU at this point, but these concepts are spreading globally. And so people who were interested in having less data collected so that your car wouldn't necessarily know all that, if that was something that was on your mind, you would have the ability to, in some jurisdictions, you would have the ability to simply decline the collection of the data. Again, that varies by country and by state. In the US right now, we have what's called a patchwork of laws, but we have increasingly more states are passing these laws. California is really at the forefront. There's a law that will be in effect in January 2020 that has, so the second tool is data subject rights, and the California law has some interesting data subject rights which allow consumers to have more control over the data that's collected. It's similar to, but not quite the same as the 8 rights that consumers or citizens can exercise in the EU. Those rights generally include the right to the deletion of your data, the right to collection of your data, the right to withdraw your consent. There are a variety of rights and they vary by location, but these are things that people should think about in the event that they're concerned about any of their devices having this level of knowledge.
Okay, just jumping off of that, so talking about consumers' rights to control the data that's collected about them or control how the data is shared about them, is that affected by whether a consumer owns a car versus uses a car, right? So you know, a lot of the panels that I've heard about today, people are talking about obviously moving to ride sharing and mobility as a service, and will consumers sort of have less rights because, you know, they're just trying out a car or trying a car versus actually owning the car?
So similar to consent and data subject rights, that question varies by geography. So in different locations, the way that data is analyzed is handled differently. In the EU, the data is attached to the person, no matter how it's used, no matter where it's used. So a person would have those same rights to ask a rental car company to delete data. I think practically speaking, the more attenuated the person is from the data, the more technically challenging it is to do that. And that's an issue that companies are facing, how they operationalize these rights as they become increasingly prevalent.
So with that being said, I want us to take a different, I guess, perspective on this question. Yes, we have certain security regulations and privacy restrictions that say how the data can be used and what consent the consumer has to provide when the data is provided. But I want to go back to a lot of times you're providing this data as a consumer within the connected car when you don't even realize you're providing that data. So it's really up to all of us to help the consumer protect that type of information. And at First Data, when we think about how the information is passed through, it's all about how can we secure and protect this pass-through of data through encryption as well as tokenization, which I can speak a little more about. So I think it's all stakeholders being involved as the new security regulations come about, which are always ever evolving.
Yeah, one thing I would add, you were talking, Steve, about new models of autonomous and other mobility solutions. I think the interesting aspect of that is those represent a number of players in those experiences. Think about a autonomous vehicle that also is delivering food, as a lot of companies have announced intentions in that space. You're dealing with a company that delivers the food, there's a company that makes the food, there's the company that owns the vehicle. And so one of the challenges in these new models is making sure there's a very clear understanding conveyed to that consumer about who's collecting your data, who the data is being transferred to, which is much different than more of the traditional vehicle model where you have kind of a one-to-one relationship from owner to the connected part of your vehicle. So big challenge there to kind of make sure there's understanding of how these networks in the autonomous space are working.
And the issues that were just raised are even more prevalent when you consider the collection of biometric data. Many businesses are looking into how biometric data can be used, but I would say, as with technology generally, the technology is often ahead of sort of the framework, the legal framework for the technology, and so there are kinds of data that are being collected that people aren't even aware are significant. So, for example, there's a lot of facial recognition technology that's used today. As we all know, our phones can use either fingerprints or facial recognition for security. Those are two kinds of biometrics: iris scans, pupil scans. There's software that people use that purports to be able to identify a person by their gait. There's software that's developed that purports to be able to identify a person by how they type on a phone. And so those kinds of technologies help link up data where previously you might have considered it something that was fairly anonymous. It's less so as the technology continues to develop.
Okay, so I want to move, well, I've got one more point, then I want to move and talk a little bit about securing the data. One other thing I'll mention is that the automakers did get together about 4 years ago, and they agreed to some privacy principles. If you're interested in this space, you should be aware of them, you should read them. And basically what it said was, we have all this data, and we're going to use it responsibly, and we are going to provide people with clear, meaningful notice as to how we're using it, and specifically with respect to sharing that data. In most cases, we're going to provide explicit notice as to how to opt out, but in some cases, with respect to some data, we're not going to share that data for marketing purposes, or we're not going to share that data at all unless there's opt-in from consumers, clear opt-in from consumers. And the situations where opt-in is required under these privacy principles is biometric data, which has given this heightened sense of protection, driver behavior information, and geolocation information, clear geolocation information. So those have been areas that have been given a heightened level of protection and require consumers to opt in if they're going to be used for sharing with third parties or for marketing purposes. So we've talked a lot now about sort of privacy and sort of consent theories with privacy. Let's talk a little bit about protecting the data and just sort of, I guess just sort of generally, how can auto companies best protect this consumer data? And maybe we'll start with Kristie.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the very beginning in terms of that initial design. And this is actually a really big topic that the Auto ISAC is addressing, the Information Sharing Analysis Center, which is a consortium of OEMs and Tier 1 and 2 suppliers. Faye Francie, I think, is talking tomorrow about it in more detail. But one of the things that we're doing as part of our best practices, which is one of the big core projects that the AutoISAC tackles is this security by design and also privacy by design. And so really building that in from the beginning and being really conscientious of the type of data that we are collecting, where we're storing it on the vehicle, how we're offboarding it from the vehicle, you know, how many different vendors it passes through, what different vendors have access to it, and really trying to make really conscientious effort up front so that we understand that data control at the beginning and at the design level. And so that when we add biometrics into the vehicle, and we add these enriched experiences, that we're doing it in a smart and intelligent way. And tokenizing is a really easy way to do that. Any sort of secure accesses, hardware trust anchors, any sort of really basic security principles that we can build in around it to make sure that we're protecting that data as best we can.
That's particularly important since we anticipate that the time will come when, in the same way that we get back into Disneyland with facial recognition, that those kinds of biometrics can be used also to access your car and all the data that's found inside.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to the, the concept generators in the next vehicle in the next 5 to 10 years, that your vehicle detects your gate as you're walking up to it, the door's unlocked, you don't have to interface with it, you sit down in your driver's seat, it detects that Kristie is driving, it moves my seat to where I want, it puts the radio controls on that I want, and I don't have to do it, and my car automatically starts, and it does everything for me. And that's kind of that next generation, the next thought process of where the technology is going. And so it's really getting in front of that with the cybersecurity and making sure that we're doing that in a really safe and intelligent way to make sure that that data is protected for those enhanced experiences. And this really becomes, I think, almost a generational issue, right? That the kids growing up today, they were always connected to technology, and they're free, or they feel more willing to maybe give up some of that privacy for that technology or for that experience, right? If you look at after the Facebook privacy issues, the number of users that dropped off was relatively minor compared to the whole population, that they're willing to sacrifice privacy for the ease and convenience of the technology.
So how difficult is building sort of the data security into a product that is going to be released potentially, years down the road, if you're talking about the automotive life cycle? Anyone want to?
I mean, for us within the financial services industry, First Data has been around for more than 30 years, and we've been doing this with card payments data. So really what we like to say is this is the next generation level of protection. We can use a model that has already been created to determine the best way to protect this PII, personally identifiable information. And we can leverage all of the things we discussed today, be it encryption, when you use algorithms to ensure that unauthorized users do not have access to the data, or as we spoke about with tokenization, as we replace the sensitive data with a token so that if an unauthorized user were to access it, they couldn't reverse engineer that information. Or it could even be the fraud detection process where we use lots of data that Ryan was alluding to and look at trends within this data and figure out where there could be a potential of fraudulent activity, or it could be even AI using artificial intelligence or machine learning and trying to figure out patterns to protect that information. I share all of that to say we can use the models that have been created in the past and innovate to ensure that the auto industry is using these tools to protect the data. So there is a path forward.
So I think I'll make two comments to Steve's question about kind of the automotive life cycle. I think the first is, and I don't know that I have the right answers, but at least two comments to think about, is a lot of the technologies that consumers are looking for, the cycle of those technologies is very fast. You think about some of the technologies they're looking for in the vehicles with integration of mobile phones, and then the apps, etc. And the challenge of those is those come out and maybe consumers expect them to be in a vehicle a year later. And with a long life cycle, coming up with a way to build the right mechanisms into the contracts, at least from my perspective and what I do, is a particular challenge and something that has to be worked through, because I think consumers are going to continue to demand the most cutting edge technology in vehicles. The second point is the end of that cycle, and to think about the life cycle these technologies, when you're integrating technologies into the vehicle that aren't used to being maintained for 10 years. Think about maybe Android as an example, when their traditional life cycle of a phone is a couple years, and the vehicle's life cycle could be 10, 20 years life. What is going to happen to those technologies when no one's supporting them anymore? So those are just two real, I think, pressing issues that have to be dealt with by the industry.
Yeah, I think that most of the technology that we're adding into vehicles and we're bringing into the automotive space is not something new. It's not something we haven't done before. We've done financial transactions. We know how to do that safely and securely. So we're learning from a lot of these other industries that have maybe already had their lessons learned, right? The healthcare industry, there's connected pacemakers out there that have significant health or safety implications if something goes wrong. So there's that part of it. There's a lot of IoT security, so we can kind of pick and choose and cherry pick these different technologies and these securities that have been really successful and integrate them into our products right from the beginning. And I think that the life cycle has really been our challenge from the beginning is, even putting Android on the vehicle. Android Auto has really been put through the ringer to even be allowed to put on the vehicle, and it's in the same position that Apple has been at the beginning, right, where you couldn't just put any app that you wanted on, even the new Apple TV, you couldn't just download any app that you wanted to Apple TV. That's new. That's just the most recent generation of that. And the vehicle is going to be the same way until we can do it safely and until we can do it securely. We'll kind of limit it and take control of it before we try to open it up. So the auto industry is, even though we might be a little bit slow at some things for some technology adoptions, we recognize that you can't have a blue screen of death as you're driving down the road. That's not safe. And we know how to test it, and we know what it looks like to get to the verification and the validation and to get to the level of reliability that we need. And so it's really now just taking those technologies and bringing them up to what we consider to be our automotive grade standards to be able to put them on the products.
What about sort of an old technology now, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi that are used in cars? They're involved in collecting and sharing data. How do you minimize security risk, data security risk with respect to those technologies? Maybe Tasha.
That's a good question. A lot of times we use Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and we don't even really think about the security concerns. Those tools are not secure, yet all the time we put it into our cars, and what do? The first thing we do when we enter into our cars, we connect our cell phones with our Bluetooth. We connect the Wi-Fi, and if you were to click on the dashboard, what do you see? Not only your name, but all of your other contacts and personal information automatically connects. And anyone who were to get into the car after you has access to that information. That's a huge risk. So what do we do about it? I think as a partnership with the automotive industry, it's everyone's role to figure out how to secure Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And there's a lot of things we can do. For the OEMs, we could perhaps put delete buttons within the devices so that once you get into a car, if information is there, it could be automatically deleted. Perhaps for the rental car companies, we can remind the drivers and the consumers that once you get out the car, please delete all of that information. For the consumers, I like to say is RVD. What does that stand for? It's when you bring back your rental car, you refuel, you vacuum, and you delete your information. And then it's with companies like First Data and all of the financial service protection and security features that we offer. We want to make sure that when the data is passing from the consumer to the dashboard, to the Bluetooth device, the infotainment device, all of that information is protected end-to-end and encrypted. So those are certain ways that we can protect the consumer with Bluetooth as well as Wi-Fi. Before we go on though, I just want to make one statement about the consumer journey. So when we think about the journey of the consumer, just think about the family relationship, and if they're going on vacation with the connected car, the first thing they do is go to a gas station, and all of that information is going from the connected car to the gas pump. Then you go to the, let's say, restaurant. All of that information is going from the connected car to the restaurant. All of that needs to be protected end to end.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for a question. We're, as expected, blasted through our time really quickly. Maybe there's time for one question? One question, I've been told. Maybe we went through the topic so thoroughly. Everyone's so shell-shocked. Okay, well, our time was up anyway. I want to extend a warm thank you to our tremendous panel. Thank you very much for the audience, participation, and attention.